The silence in this place is the loudest thing I've ever heard. It's thicker than the fog that settles over the rose garden in the morning, and heavier than the blankets they tuck around my frail body at night. For 60 years, I held a secret inside me so dark and so heavy it turned my bones to lead and my heart to stone. I thought I would carry it to my grave, another quiet old woman, with a past no one bothered to ask about, but the truth has a way of fighting for the light, especially when the end is near. My husband was a monster celebrated as a saint, and my mother, the woman who gave me life, stood by and watched him try to take it from me. Before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from, and what time it is. I just want to know I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps more people become aware of the reality of elder abuse. Now let me tell you what really happened. Richard Wright was the most charming man in 3 counties. When he walked into a room, it was like the sun coming out from behind a cloud. He had a smile that could coax a bird from a tree, and a laugh that made you feel like you were in on the most wonderful secret in the world. When he set his sights on me, a shy little thing of 19, I felt like the luckiest girl alive. My mother, Eleanor, certainly thought so. "Oh, Evelyn," she would sigh, her hands clasped together in delight. "He's such a fine man, a provider. He will take good care of you." And in public, he did. He opened doors for me, pulled out my chair, and called me his darling Evie. Our courtship was a whirlwind of church picnics, Sunday drives, and evenings spent on my parents' porch swing. His arm draped protectively around me. He said all the right things, made all the right promises. He was building a small house on a nice plot of land just outside of town, and he spoke of a future filled with children and security. To a girl who had very little, it sounded like a fairy tale. The first warning sign was so small I almost missed it. We were at a town fair a month before the wedding. I was talking to an old school friend, a boy named Samuel who had always been kind to me. We were just laughing about a funny memory from our school days. Richard came up behind me and put his hand on my waist. His grip was a little too tight. "Ready to go, darling?" he asked, his smile never faltering. But his eyes, when they glanced at Samuel, were as cold and hard as river stones. Later, in the car, the silence was heavy. "What were you and Samuel talking about for so long?" he asked, his voice casual, but with an edge. "Oh, nothing. Just remembering old times," I said lightly. "It didn't look like nothing," he said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "You looked a little too friendly." I was stunned. "Richard, he's just an old friend. I don't like it," he stated flatly. "You're my girl now. You shouldn't be laughing like that with other men." I tried to defend myself, but he cut me off, telling me I was being naive and that I needed to be more careful about how things looked. I ended up apologizing, feeling foolish and confused. I told myself he was just protective, that it was a sign of how much he loved me. When I mentioned it to my mother, she waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, Evelyn, that's just a man's way. He's proud. He wants the world to know you belong to him. Don't make a fuss over nothing." And so I didn't. I pushed the unease down, convincing myself that she was right. After we were married, the control tightened, slowly and methodically. It started with my friends. He'd find reasons why they weren't good people for me to be around. One was too loud, another's husband was a gossip. He'd make the evenings so unpleasant when they visited that, one by one, they stopped coming. Then, it was my hobbies. My little sewing circle, my one evening out a week, became a source of conflict. "I work hard all day, Evie," he'd say, his voice laced with wounded pride. "Is it too much to ask for my wife to be home to greet me?" My mother, who lived just a few miles away, saw it all. She saw my world shrinking, saw me becoming more and more isolated. But to her, Richard was still the fine man, the good provider. He was always respectful to her, bringing her gifts, fixing things around her house. He wore his mask of civility so perfectly for her. A wife's place is in the home. "Evelyn," she'd tell me when I'd express a flicker of my unhappiness, "a man like Richard has a lot of stress on his shoulders. Your job is to make his life easier, not to add to his burdens." Her words were like bricks, building a wall around me, trapping me inside my perfect little house with my perfectly charming husband. I was becoming a prisoner, and my own mother was handing the monster the key, telling me all the while that it was for my own good. The man she so admired was slowly, deliberately, erasing the woman I was. and she just smiled and called it love. My world is now for pale green walls, a window that looks out onto a manicured lawn I'll never walk on, and a television that hums with shows about people living lives I can no longer imagine. My name is Evelyn, and at 82, most of my days are the same. They wake me, they wash me, they feed me, and they talk to me in that slow, loud voice people reserve for the very old or the very young. They are kind, but they are strangers. Most of them see what they expect to see. A quiet grandmotherly figure, a little lost in her own thoughts, with hands that tremble when she reaches for a glass of water. They see the gentle smile I've perfected over a lifetime, the one that keeps everyone at a safe distance. They don't see the steel in my spine that was forged in fire, or the screams I swallowed until they became a permanent lump in my throat. Then came Chloe. She was different from the other nurses, younger, with eyes that didn't just look at you, but saw you. She didn't rush. She would sit with me after bringing my medication, not out of duty, but out of what seemed like genuine curiosity. She'd ask about the book I was pretending to read or comment on the weather. Small talk, yes. But it was the first time in years someone had spoken to me like I was still a person. One afternoon, she was tidying the small collection of trinkets on my bedside table. There's not much there, porcelain bird, a framed needlepoint I made long ago, and a single, silver-framed photograph. It's a picture of me on my wedding day. I was 20 years old, impossibly young, with a face full of dreams. My dress was simple, my veil was borrowed, and my smile was as wide and bright as a summer sky. I looked radiant, hopeful, and completely unaware of the darkness that was waiting for me just beyond the camera's flash. Chloe picked it up, her touch gentle. "You were so beautiful, Evelyn," she said softly, "so happy." Her words, so simple and innocent, struck me like a physical blow. Happy? Was I ever truly that person? Or was she just a costume I wore for the world? I didn't answer right away. I just stared at the girl in the photograph, a ghost from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. The chasm between that smiling bride and the withered woman sitting in this room was 60 years of unspeakable pain. Chloe must have sensed the shift in me. The air grew thick and heavy. She placed the photo back on the table, her movements slow and deliberate. "Evelyn," she asked, her voice losing its professional cheerfulness, replaced now with genuine concern, "are you all right?" I looked from the photograph to her kind, questioning face. For the first time, the walls I had built around my heart for 60 years began to tremble. The secret I had guarded with my life, the one that had eaten me from the inside out, pushed against my lips, demanding to be heard. A single, hot tear escaped my eye and traced a wrinkled path down my cheek. It was a tear for the girl in the picture, for the life she never got to live. "No, dear," I whispered, my voice rusty from disuse. "I'm not all right. And I haven't been for a very, very long time." It was the truest thing I had said in more than half a century. And with that one sentence, the dam began to break. For the first year of our marriage, Richard's anger was a storm on the horizon. Dark clouds, distant thunder, but no rain. His control was, in his words, the sharp tone that cut me down, the cold silences that could last for days, the way he could make me feel small and stupid for the slightest imagined transgression. The violence was emotional, a constant, low-level hum of fear that dictated my every move. I learned to walk on eggshells, to anticipate his moods, to become a perfect reflection of whatever he wanted me to be. The first time he laid a hand on me, it was over something so trivial I can barely remember it. I think it was a shirt. I hadn't ironed his favorite white shirt for a meeting he had. I had ironed 3 others, but not that specific one, because it had a small stain I was trying to treat. When he saw it wasn't in the closet, his face changed. The charming mask dissolved, and for the first time, I saw the true face that lay beneath. His jaw clenched, and his eyes, which could be so warm, turned into chips of ice. "Where is my white shirt?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Explained about the stain, my voice trembling slightly. "I was trying to get it clean for you, Richard. I have your blue one ready, and the gray striped one." "Did I ask for the blue one? Did I ask for the gray one?" he barked, stepping towards me. "I wanted the white one. Is that so difficult for you to understand?" "I'm sorry," I stammered, backing away. "I thought I was helping." "You thought," he sneered. "You don't think. That's your problem. You are supposed to do as you are told." He had me backed against the bedroom wall, My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. He raised his hand, and I flinched, squeezing my eyes shut. The slap was sharp and stunning. My head whipped to the side, and my cheek exploded with a hot, stinging pain. Silence. The only sound was my own ragged breathing. I opened my eyes, my hand flying to my face. The shock was so profound, it was like the world had tilted on its axis. This couldn't be happening. Not Richard, not my husband. He stood there, looking at his own hand as if it were a foreign object. For a moment, a flicker of something, was it regret, crossed his face. Then it was gone, replaced by a cold fury. "Now, look what you made me do," he said, his voice low and menacing. He turned and stormed out of the house, slamming the door so hard a picture fell off the wall in the hallway. I slid down the wall to the floor, my body shaking uncontrollably. I sat there for over an hour, the red mark on my cheek burning like a brand. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the senseless. I kept telling myself it was a one-time thing. He was stressed. It was my fault for arguing. I made excuses for him because the alternative was too terrifying to contemplate. The next day, my cheek was still tender and slightly bruised. I tried to cover it with powder before I went to visit my mother. I needed to talk to someone. I thought, foolishly, that my own mother would be horrified, that she would protect me. I sat at her kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a cup of tea I couldn't drink. I couldn't bring myself to say the words, so I just turned my head slightly, showing her the faint discoloration on my cheek. She looked at it, then looked away, busying herself with wiping down the already spotless counter. "You have to learn not to provoke him, Evelyn," she said, her back to me. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. I was speechless. "Provoke him? Mother, he hit me." She finally turned to face me, her expression stern, impatient. "And what did you do? Richard is a good man, but any man can be pushed too far. Marriage is about compromise. You have to learn which battles to fight." "He hit me because of a shirt." My voice cracked, a sob catching in my throat. "Then, for heaven's sake, Evelyn, make sure his shirts are ironed," she said sharply. "You have a beautiful home, a husband with a good job who is respected in this town. Do not throw that away over a little spat. Now, pull yourself together. You look a mess." I stared at her, the tea growing cold in my hands. The physical pain on my cheek was nothing compared to the deep, shattering agony of her betrayal. In that moment, I understood. I was utterly and completely alone. There was no one to run to. No one would believe me. The man who was supposed to love me had hurt me, and the woman who was supposed to protect me had just told me it was my fault. The storm had come, and I was stranded with no shelter in sight. Years passed, the slaps became punches. The emotional abuse became a constant, suffocating fog. I learned to hide the bruises. I learned to lie to the concerned ladies at church who would ask why I always wore long sleeves, even in the summer. I told them I was clumsy. I became an expert at being clumsy. Richard's reputation in the town only grew. He was on the town council, a deacon at the church. He was Mr. Right, the charming, generous man. At home, he was my jailer, my tormentor. My mother, Eleanor, was a frequent visitor. She needed things: a ride to the doctor, help with her groceries, someone to listen to her complain about her neighbors. Richard was always perfect in her presence. He would call her Mama Eleanor, kiss her on the cheek, and treat her like a queen. She would watch him, her eyes shining with approval, and then she would look at me, a silent command in her gaze. "Be grateful. Keep him happy." She saw the hollows in my cheeks, the fear in my eyes, the way I flinched if Richard moved too quickly. She saw it all, and she chose to see nothing. The night it happened. The night that broke the last unbroken piece of me. My mother was staying with us. Her furnace had broken, and it was a bitterly cold January. She was sleeping in the guest room, just down the hall from our bedroom. Richard had been drinking. He didn't drink often, but when he did, the monster inside him grew bold. He had lost a contract at work, and he was seething, looking for someone to blame. And I was always the closest target. The argument started over dinner. He accused me of overcooking the roast, of making him look weak in front of his business partners, of being a useless wife. His voice got louder and louder. My mother, sitting at the table with us, just kept her head down, carefully cutting her food into tiny pieces, pretending she was deaf. "Eleanor, why don't you go on to bed?" Richard said finally, his voice slick and smooth again. "Evie and I just need to have a little talk." My mother looked at me, her eyes pleading. Not for me, but for herself. She didn't want to be in the room. She stood up, folded her napkin, and said, "Yes, I am a bit tired. Good night, you too." She walked out of the dining room without a single backward glance. I heard the door to the guest room click shut. The moment she was gone, Richard grabbed me by the arm and dragged me into the living room. He threw me onto the floor. The things he said to me then, the names he called me, they were meant to strip away every last shred of my humanity. Then came the beating. It was worse than ever before. He was out of control, his fists and his feet finding my ribs, my back, my head. I cried out. I screamed for my mother. "Mama, please, help me, Mama." I knew she could hear me. The house wasn't that big. The walls weren't that thick. The silence from her room was a physical presence. It was an answer. It was her choice. And then, Richard's rage shifted into something else, something darker and more terrifying. He looked at me, broken and crying on the floor, and a sickening smile spread across his face. "You're going to learn your lesson tonight," he slurred. "You're going to learn what it means to be a wife." What he did to me next, on the floor of our living room, was not an act of marriage. It was an act of pure hatred and violation. He raped me, while I sobbed, while I begged, while I called out for the mother who was just 30 feet away. He broke me in a way from which I would never recover. Through it all, through my own pain and terror, the most piercing sound was the silence from down the hall. Her silence was her consent. Her silence was her complicity. She wasn't just watching a show. She was holding the camera, making sure the world saw nothing but the perfect family portrait. That night, my husband may have been the one to violate my body, but it was my mother who allowed him to shatter my soul. The world as I knew it, the last flicker of hope that I might find a protector in it, ended right there on that living room floor. I woke the next morning on the cold floor. Every part of my body screamed in protest. Richard was gone, already left for work as if nothing had happened. The house was quiet. I managed to pull my battered body up and limp to the bathroom. The face in the mirror was a stranger, swollen, bruised, with eyes that were utterly vacant. The light inside them had been extinguished. I heard a soft knock on the bathroom door. "Evelyn, is the coffee on?" It was my mother's voice, cheerful and normal. The door opened before I could answer, and she walked in. She stopped dead when she saw me. Her eyes widened, taking in the split lip, the darkening bruise on my jaw, the raw misery of my existence. For a single, fleeting second, I saw a flicker of horror in her eyes. A gasp escaped her lips. "Stop, this was it," I thought. "Now now she'll help me." But then, as quickly as it appeared, the horror was gone. She composed her face into a mask of stern disapproval. She walked past me to the sink, turned on the tap, and began to wash her hands. "You should put some ice on that," she said, her voice clinical, as if she were talking about a sprained ankle. "And for goodness sake, clean yourself up before Richard gets home. You don't want to start him off again." And that was it. No questions, no comfort, no outrage, just a practical, cold instruction to hide the evidence of the crime she had allowed to happen. She had heard my screams. She had known, and she had chosen to do nothing then, and she was choosing to do nothing now. That was the moment my love for my mother died. It didn't fade away. It was executed, right there in that cold, tiled bathroom. I understood then that my prison had two guards. One was violent and cruel, the other was silent and complicit. And I didn't know which was worse. For decades after that night, the secret remained locked inside me. It festered. It became a part of who I was. Richard and I continued our life. We grew old together. To the outside world, we were a quiet, devoted couple. He became gentler in his old age, his physical strength waning, but the fear he had instilled in me never went away. It was the wallpaper of my life. My mother grew old, too. I took care of her in her final years, just as a good daughter was expected to. I fed her, I bathed her, I took her to her appointments, but our conversations were empty, shells of words about the weather and gossip. The massive, unspoken truth sat between us always, a bloated corpse in the room. She died in her sleep at the age of 88, and I felt nothing but a hollow sense of relief. Richard passed away 2 years later from a heart attack. At his funeral, people came up to me, patting my hand, telling me what a wonderful man he was, how lucky I had been. I just smiled my quiet, practiced smile and nodded. After he was gone, I sold the house, that house of horrors, and with the money, I moved into this care facility. I wanted to be somewhere clean, somewhere that held no memories, but the memories came with me. They were all I had left. And so I sat, day after day, in this pale green room, drowning in the silence, until her simple question about a photograph. That night, after she left, I had the nightmare. It wasn't a fuzzy, half-forgotten dream. It was a perfect, vivid reliving of that night. I felt the cold floorboards. I heard my mother's door click shut. I felt Richard's weight, his breath on my face. I woke up screaming, my own voice, raw and hoarse. A night nurse rushed in, flipping on the lights, and in that harsh, sudden brightness, I knew I couldn't carry it alone anymore. The secret was a poison, and it had been killing me slowly for 60 years. If I died with it inside me, he would win. They would both win. The next afternoon, when Chloe came in with my tea, I looked her straight in the eye. My hands were trembling, but my voice was steady. "Chloe," I said, "I need to tell you a story. I need you to just sit and listen, please. I need someone to know what really happened." She pulled a chair close to my bed, her face full of a compassion I had not seen in a lifetime. She took my hand. "I'm listening, Evelyn," she said. "Take all the time you need." And so, for the first time, I unlocked the silence. I started at the beginning, with the charming Mr. Wright, and I told her everything. Telling the story was like lancing a wound that had been festering for a lifetime. The words, at first, came out choked and fragmented. I had to stop often, to catch my breath, to wipe away the tears that flowed not with the hot sting of fresh pain, but with the slow, steady ache of ancient grief. Chloe never rushed me. She sat with me for hours that first day, and then came back the next, and the next. She just listened, her presence a quiet anchor in the storm of my memory. She was the witness I never had. I told her about the fear, the constant, gnawing fear of saying the wrong thing, of making the wrong move. I described the isolation, the way Richard had systematically cut me off from everyone who had ever cared for me, leaving me on an island where he was the only other inhabitant. I told her about my mother. This was the hardest part. It was one thing to be hated by an enemy, but to be abandoned by your own mother was a wound of a different kind. I explained how Eleanor's approval of Richard gave him a shield of respectability, how her denial of my pain made me question my own sanity. She would see a bruise on my arm, I explained to Chloe, my voice barely a whisper, and she would tell me I needed to take more iron from my thin blood. She saw everything, and she chose to rewrite it into a story she could live with. A story with a good son-in-law and a clumsy, difficult daughter. When I finally reached the part about that terrible night, the night of the beating, the rape, and the closed guest room door, I had to stop. The memory was so toxic it felt like I was choking on it. I looked at Chloe, expecting to see horror, or pity, or disbelief. Instead, I saw tears streaming down her own face. She wasn't pitying me. She was weeping with me. She squeezed my hand, her grip firm and grounding. "You survived, Evelyn," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You survived an evil most people can't even imagine. You are so strong." No one had ever called me strong. I had been called difficult, emotional, naive, and clumsy, but never strong. Her words were like water on parched land, recounting the rest of my life, the long, empty decades of living with my tormentor, caring for my betrayer, and smiling through it. All felt different after that. It was no longer just a story of victory. As I spoke the words aloud, I began to see the thread of my own resilience running through it. I had survived. I had endured. I had kept the part of myself hidden away, a tiny flickering flame that they could never extinguish. The act of telling, of giving voice to the voiceless parts of my past, began to change the nature of the memories themselves. They were no longer haunting ghosts that ambushed me in the dark. By putting them into words, I was putting them in their proper place. In the past, I was drawing a line between the woman who had endured the trauma and the woman who was telling the story. They were the same person, but for the first time, I felt a sense of distance. I was no longer drowning in the memory. I was standing on the shore, looking back at it. The final story I told Chloe was about Richard's death. He had his heart attack in the garden. I was the one who found him. I was the one who called the ambulance. I held his hand as we waited, and the last thing he said to me, his voice a panicked rasp, was, "Evie, don't leave me." I didn't, I told Chloe. I stayed right there until the paramedics took him away. I did my duty as a wife, right to the very end. Chloe looked at me, her expression thoughtful. Were you sad? I considered her question for a long time. I wasn't sad that he was gone, I answered truthfully. The world was safer without him in it. But I was sad for the girl in the photograph. I was sad for the love we never had. And I was sad because his death meant my story would never be acknowledged. He would die a saint, and I would die with his secret. That was the deepest sadness of all, until now. By speaking the truth to her, I was finally taking back my own narrative. The weight of the words was immense, but as I let them go, I realized it was nothing compared to the crushing weight of the silence I had carried for so long. After the last story was told, a new kind of silence settled in my room. It wasn't the old, heavy silence of buried secrets. It was a light, peaceful, quiet. The air itself felt easier to breathe. My relationship with Chloe changed. She was still my nurse, but she was also my friend, the keeper of my truth. There was a quiet understanding between us that needed no more words. When she looked at me now, she saw all of me, the smiling bride, the terrified wife, the broken victim, and the resilient survivor. And I felt seen, truly seen, for the first time in my life. The nightmares stopped. I still had sad days, moments, when the ghosts of the past would whisper at the edges of my mind, but they no longer had power over me. They were just echoes, faint and far away. The terror was gone, replaced by a profound and weary sadness, and even that was beginning to fade, like a bruise healing from the inside out. One afternoon, a few weeks after I'd finished my story, Chloe came in carrying a small, potted orchid. I thought your room could use a bit more life, she said, placing it on the windowsill where the sun could catch its petals. I looked at the delicate, beautiful flower. Thank you, Chloe, it's lovely. Evelyn, she said, her tone serious now. Have you ever thought about forgiving them? Your husband, your mother. I looked out the window, at the roses in the garden below. I thought about Richard's charm and his cruelty. I thought about my mother's fear and her betrayal. I had spent years wrestling with that question in the dead of night. Did they deserve forgiveness? Did I have it in me to give it? No, I said finally, my voice clear and calm. I turned back to look at her. I've come to understand that forgiveness is not something I owe them. It's not a requirement for my own healing. Some things are unforgivable. And that's all right. What I needed wasn't to forgive them. What I needed was to stop blaming myself. I reached out and touched one of the orchid's soft petals. For 60 years, I believed their story, that I was difficult, that I was clumsy, that I was the one at fault. I carried their shame as if it were my own. Telling you everything, all of it. It wasn't about forgiveness. It was about truth. It was about finally giving the blame back to the people who earned it. A small, genuine smile touched my lips, perhaps for the first time since I was that girl in the photograph. It wasn't the wide, hopeful smile of youth, but something far more precious. The quiet, knowing smile of peace. The weight was gone. My soul felt light. I was no longer just the sum of the terrible things that had been done to me. I was Evelyn. I was a woman who had survived. My story was not one of despair, but one of endurance. I don't know how many days I have left in this place, with its pale green walls and its quiet routines, but they are my days. The silence is finally my own, filled not with fear, but with tranquility. The secret is out, and I am free. My truth is my legacy, and in the end, it was the truth that finally set me free.